The people of the Middle Ages did not always eat well. They did not always eat enough. They feared famine. They fought weather and war and want. They built rituals around their food to protect it, blessed it, shared it, sacrificed for it. They made feasts when they could and stretched crumbs when they had to. But always, always, they returned to the fire, to the bowl, to the table, to the act of eating, not just to survive, but to affirm that they were here. And perhaps so do we. When we stir the pot, when we pass the bread, when we raise the cup, we are not so far from them. Their recipes may be gone, their spices renamed, their tools lost, their kitchens long dust, but the spirit remains. And every time you slice an onion, or simmer a broth, or light a flame in your kitchen, you are echoing something ancient, something enduring, something profoundly human. So now, as your eyes grow heavier, as the warmth of the past settles quietly into your limbs, imagine that fire again, the one we visited at the very beginning. Low stone walls, a roof thick with thatch, a pot suspended, its sides blackened by years, the smell of leeks and barley, gentle and familiar, the soft chatter of a family, barely more than murmurs, a dog curled by the door, a baby sleeping nearby, fingers twitching in a dream. This is not a story of kings or battles. Not tonight. Tonight, we remember something smaller, something slower. The way food carried people forward, one meal at a time. How it bridged grief. How it marked joy. How it soothed the body. And sometimes, gently, even the soul. So rest now. Let the past rest with you. Let the rhythm of the spoon against the bowl, the soft scrape of a knife on a board, the whisper of fire against hearthstone, guide you into dreams. Perhaps tonight, you'll dream of a medieval table, not lavish, not grand, but full of warmth, of story, of people who lived and ate and loved long before your time, but not so different from you. And in that dream, may you find comfort, as they once did, under the same moon, beside a flickering fire, with bread in hand, and the peace of sleep waiting just beyond. Good night, and thank you for spending this time together. May your rest be long, your dreams gentle, and your table always warm. The fire has burned low now. What was once a steady flicker of light across stone walls and wooden beams has faded to a warm, pulsing glow, the embers humming gently beneath the ash. You feel the soft weight of stillness settle over everything. A kind of quiet that does not rush to end. A quiet that belongs to the closing of something long and rich and human. You have traveled across time tonight, and into the silence of a monastery's stone refectory, where prayers once whispered into broth still echo, in some way, in every meal taken since, not in leaps, but in slow, careful steps, through fields and feasts, kitchens and castles, from the rough wood of a peasant's bowl, to the silver platters of queens and kings. You have wandered through meals where hands calloused from labor reached for bread without a word, and through banquets where music played over spice-scented air, laughter echoing from halls hung with tapestries. You have lingered near pots of lentils and barley, boiled day after day in shared survival. And you have stood in the shadows of sugar towers, where food performed a different kind of magic, not of nourishment, but of power. And through it all, one thing has remained, the act of eating, the ritual of gathering, the rhythm of hunger, met and remembered. It is a thread that weaves through time, this thing we call food. It is not only sustenance, it is memory. It is identity. It is story. In every age, the table, whether rough or grand, becomes the place where lives unfold. Bread torn and passed becomes a language. A bowl refilled becomes a kindness. A meal prepared, even in the face of loss, becomes an offering to the world, an unspoken vow that life continues, even as it changes shape. And so now, in this soft space between wakefulness and sleep, you may find yourself returning, not to castles or cathedrals, but to smaller places, humbler moments, a woman stirring stew by firelight, a child cracking hazelnuts beside her, a monk cutting herbs with steady hands, a baker folding dough in silence before the village stirs, a servant brushing crumbs from a long table long after the guests have gone. These scenes do not need names. They belong to no one, and yet they belong to everyone, because in every one of us still is the need to gather, to eat, to share, no matter the time, no matter the station. Even now, in a world of fast meals and digital lives, there is something unshakably human about the comfort of a warm dish, the scent of bread, the steam rising from a pot, the hush before the first bite. In Florence, a chronicle records the abandonment of meals. It says, "Men no longer dine together. They leave plates half-eaten. The clatter of forks is gone from the inns. The kitchens have cooled." A poet writes, "Even the soup fears the breath of its cook." And yet, not everywhere was silent. In some cities, those untouched by the first wave threw plague feasts. As if to defy the illness with revelry, wine flowed, tables overflowed, but soon after, those same rooms became still. The feast ended, the host gone, the plates unwashed. As the plague waned, some towns erected plague crosses, and around them, people left food not for the living, but for those who might soon join the dead. Cheese wrapped in cloth, a jug of ale, flat loaves with prayers scratched into the crust. It was not superstition. It was ritual. One last act of hospitality in a world that had stopped welcoming. And then the years passed. The dead were buried. The fields were sown again. The ovens warmed. And once more, people began to gather. They were changed. Thinner, older, more cautious. But they gathered to eat, to speak, to remember. And though the food was no richer than before, it tasted ... different, heavier, holier, as though every crumb now carried meaning. And in some villages, even a simple meal, lentils, leeks, barley, was spoken of not just as supper, but as thanksgiving. So now, imagine again a table, not grand, not poor, just a table, a few hands reaching slowly, a bowl passed, a quiet grace, bread torn and shared, soup stirred and served. Outside, the night is cool, and the wind carries the scent of turned soil. But inside, where the candles glow, softly, faintly, there is life. Life held gently. Life that knows what it is to have gone without. Life that cherishes, silently, every bite. But in other places, the impact was stranger. In the aftermath of the plague's first wave, something unusual happened. Wages rose, bread became more available. Meat, once rare to the poor, found its way into more bowls. Why? Because labor had become scarce. The people who remained could ask for more. They could demand better meals, and they did. A plowman might earn double. A shepherd could bargain. A brewer might become rich. For a brief time, peasants ate better than ever before. Not feasts, not sugar swans, but more bread, more cheese, more meat. A kind of food revolution, born from silence. Still, the scars remained. In monasteries, whole refectories sat vacant. Monks no longer bowed heads before steaming bowls of pottage. Chant gave way to coughing. And then, to nothing. Some towns instituted laws about burial feasts, not to encourage them, but to limit them. Too many families had spent their savings on lavish spreads to honor the dead, only to fall into ruin soon after. So, rulers set restrictions. Only bread. Only ale. No meats, no minstrels. Mourning had to be ... modest. But even in grief, the impulse to gather around food remained. Because food meant survival. And more than that, it meant memory. There is one quiet story from 1350 in a village near Rouen, France. A woman named Unknown was found preparing bread in her cottage. She had lost her husband, her sons, her sister. Only a niece remained. And yet she was baking, not to sell, not even to eat, but to place loaves on the stones at the village shrine, offerings to those gone. Bread as remembrance. No words written, no sermon spoken. Just warm crust, left in the morning sun, cooling slowly, quietly, until it too vanished. Imagine the silence after too much loss. Fields untouched, bread unbaked, bowls empty not because of poverty ... but because no one remains to fill them. The hearth cold, not from neglect, but from mourning. And outside, only the wind speaks. In the Middle Ages, there came a time when hunger and death sat at the same table. In the 14th century, the rhythm of daily life in Europe, slow, seasonal, and ritual-bound, was interrupted by something vast and unstoppable. It came by ship. It rode the backs of rats and the teeth of fleas. It moved through cities like smoke and through villages like a shadow that would not lift. The Black Death, a name that would only come later. After the stories had piled up like the dead it left behind. But at the time, it was simply the plague. And when it came, it did not ask who was rich or poor, who farmed the land or owned it, who sat at the high table or begged outside the gate. It sat beside everyone, and suddenly no one dined without fear. Before the plague, food was already fragile. A single bad harvest could tip a region into famine. A wet spring might rot the seed. A long winter could drain the stores before the thaw. But the Black Death was not a famine in the usual sense. It was food, grain in barns, animals in fields, bread to be baked. What was missing ... were the people. The millers to grind, the bakers to knead, the cooks to stir the pot, the laborers to reap the wheat, the carters to carry it. And so, across towns and hamlets, food sat untouched. Chickens wandered without pens. Fruit fell and rotted on trees. Cows lowed in empty barns. It was a strange hunger, not one of empty cupboards, but of emptied lives. In wealthier households, the silence was heavier. Feasts were canceled, banquets postponed, tables cleared not after a meal, but after a loss. A servant would not arrive. Another ... gone. The high table grew sparse. The platters dulled. What good was sugar-dusted pastry if the kitchen echoed with absence? Even kings sent their cooks away, fearful of food prepared by hands they did not trust. Eleanor de Montfort, a noblewoman in England, wrote in her surviving letters not of gowns or land disputes, but of sending for food and finding no one left to bring it. In the courts of Europe, some nobles dined alone, not out of preference, but because their household had been halved. And amid the courses came entertainment. Minstrels played lute, harp, and pipe. Jugglers spun torches and knives. Acrobats bent in impossible ways. Poets recited verses crafted for the host. A trained bear might dance. A fool might make jest of noble guests, carefully, never too bold. All the while, food continued. Between courses came voids, small offerings of sweetmeats, candied ginger, spiced wine, to refresh the breath, to lighten the palate, to pause and anticipate. The meal was long, sometimes hours, not rushed, not devoured, but measured, layered, balanced like music. The final course brought sweet things. Wafers, tarts, custards, marzipan figures, perhaps fruits glazed in honey, or wine jelly, cut in cubes, glistening like gemstones. And to close, hypocras, spiced wine, served warm. A sip to signal the end, a curtain call for the palate. But behind the beauty, there was always labor. The kitchens were massive, hot, crowded. Dozens of hands chopping, roasting, boiling, arranging. Fires burned constantly. Pots boiled. Cooks shouted. Pages ran. Recipes were not written for taste alone, but for effect. Make a beast that is part rabbit, part fish. Color this tart with herbs until it is green as grass. Let the pie sing. These were not instructions for supper. They were instructions for theater. And in every successful banquet, there was a moment of silence. When a guest paused, spoon in hand, and simply wondered at the thing before them. That was the goal. Not fullness, but awe. And yet, not all guests were impressed. Some criticized the waste, the vanity, the hunger for display over depth. Chroniclers wrote of noblemen leaving the feast still hungry, while peasants outside begged for bread. Others saw the pageantry as essential, a reminder that their world had order, that the Lord could provide, that the court had reach. Feasts were rarely about food alone. They were about politics, alliances, celebration, diplomacy. They fed not just bodies, but reputation. Still, the food itself was real. It was cooked, it was served, it was eaten. Even the grandest swan was plucked by someone, gutted, trussed, roasted, carried. And after the guests left, the hall quieted. The candles guttered. The rushes grew cold. And in the kitchens, the scraps were gathered. The trenchers, soaked in sauce and meat juice, were stacked. Some thrown to animals. Some given to the poor. Even in grandeur, hunger lingered. And so, as you lie still now, eyes closed, mind drifting, imagine not the noise of the banquet, but its aftermath. The slow extinguishing of candles. The soft hush as tapestries flutter in the night breeze. A single dish left behind, still warm. A crumb on a silver plate. The echo of laughter fading into stone. And the quiet truth beneath it all, that food, even when dressed in spectacle, still begins with fire and ends with fullness. Close your eyes and imagine a hall glowing in candlelight. The stone walls flicker with gold and shadow. Musicians warm their instruments by the fire. The air is thick with the scent of roasting meat, honeyed wine, and damp rushes. Outside, the village sleeps. But inside this room, a kind of magic begins, not of spells or sorcery, but of food. Food served not only to fill the stomach, but to astonish the eyes. In the Middle Ages, a banquet was never just a meal. It was a performance, a celebration, an event wrapped in protocol, timing, symbolism, and spectacle. While ordinary folk dined from shared bowls near a hearth, the noble classes gathered in great halls, where food, sound, color, and movement blended into a carefully orchestrated display. And behind the show, behind every swan in feathers, every sugar tower, every procession of courses, there was a message. Not, we are hungry, but we are powerful. The setting was the first act. Imagine a hall 50 feet long, beams carved in oak. At one end, a raised platform, the high table, where the lord and honored guests would sit, looking down the length of the room. Below, rows of long wooden tables arranged for lesser guests, retainers, musicians, clerics. The floor was spread with fresh rushes, often mixed with sweet-smelling herbs, thyme, mint, lavender, crushed softly underfoot with each step. Tapestries hung on the walls, not just for warmth, but for display. Scenes of battles, saints, hunts, woven in thread and gold. Above, candlelight dripped from iron chandeliers. Each flame flickered, reflected in goblets and polished plates. The room shimmered, not with jewels, but with expectation. The guests arrived slowly. There was no rushing. One did not simply sit where one liked. Placement at a banquet was a map of influence. Who sat beside whom, how close one was to the Lord, how quickly one was served. The most important sat above the salt, near the high table. Everyone else, below. This was not insult, it was tradition. Structure, the unspoken code of feasting. To sit close was to be seen, to speak to the host, to be offered the choicest cuts, the richest wine. The meal began not with food, but with ritual. A servant offered water for washing, poured over silver bowls into basins. The guests' hands were dried with fine linen. Cleanliness was not just comfort, it was status, preparation. Then the first course arrived. Not one dish, not two, but a procession. Perhaps a roast venison, spiced and glazed, or capons in almond milk, scattered with dried fruit. Platters of fish, arranged in circles, glistening in oil and herbs. Pies filled with minced meat, eggs, and raisins, wrapped in crusts colored with saffron or beet. Each dish arrived with ceremony, carried by servants, sometimes accompanied by musicians or dancers. At grand occasions, dishes were even announced, like honored guests. The food was not only to be eaten, it was meant to be seen. There were entremets, dishes not meant for nourishment, but for amazement. A roast peacock, its feathers reattached after cooking, posed as if alive, its neck arched in elegance. A castle made of sugar, its towers glazed with syrup, its windows shimmering with jelly panes. A pie that, when cut, released live birds, blackbirds or finches, that flew into the rafters, their wings a burst of sudden song. These were not everyday occurrences. They were reserved for weddings, coronations, treaty feasts. Moments when food became narrative, an edible story told to reinforce power, wealth, and control. Dishes reflected status too. The wealthy ate from glazed ceramics, wooden trenchers, metal plates, or even edible bread trenchers used only once, and then discarded or given to the poor. The poor used bowls shared among family. A single spoon passed from hand to hand. No napkins, no cloths. And yet, there was still care. Still love in the way food was offered, even without luxury. In some households, food was performed. Meals were served in courses. First soups and sauces, then meat, then sweets and fruits. Each course signaled rhythm, refinement. The presence of spices, cinnamon, saffron, pepper, was not only flavor. It was proof of connection to distant places. Proof that your purse reached further than your neighbor's. To pour wine sweetened with clove and honey was to announce a kind of power quietly. To present a dish with gold leaf or colored with saffron until it gleamed was to show not hunger, but prestige. These meals were ritual, not just sustenance. And the poor, though they might smell it, though they might dream of it, knew it belonged elsewhere. But status was not only found in the food itself. It was also present in the act of eating. To have leisure, to eat slowly, in courses, to speak between bites, to digest at length, was a luxury in itself. The laboring classes ate quickly before returning to the field. They ate standing or squatting near the fire. Their meals were brief, practical, rhythmic. The noble classes ate ceremonially, surrounded by others whose job was simply to make the experience smooth. And this separation of pace, of preparation, of presentation became part of how status was sustained. Yet even in these quiet contrasts, the line was not always rigid. Feast days brought surprises. A wedding might elevate the table of a peasant family for a single night. A noble might fast on fish and barley gruel as part of devotion, while a prosperous villager dined on pork and beans. Food was never static, and status, though deeply entrenched, could be tasted in degrees. But still, the differences lingered in the whiteness of your bread, in the smell of your stew, in the gleam of your spoon. So as you imagine now the clink of a silver cup or the crackle of a dark rye crust, know that these sounds once echoed through halls and cottages alike, speaking softly but clearly of where you stood in the world. Not all power is warm. Some is sipped, some is salted, Some is stirred into the pot and never shared. But even the humblest food, offered with care, reminds us that dignity is not always a matter of gold. Sometimes it is a bowl held with both hands, a meal shared in silence, and the memory of warmth long after the fire has gone out. Imagine a loaf of bread resting on a table. Its crust is golden, its crumb fine and pale. Now imagine another, darker, rougher, baked with rye and bran, cracked at the edges. Both are bread, both feed. But in the medieval world, one is a symbol, and the other a necessity. In every age, food has said more than just "you are hungry." It has whispered or shouted, "This is who you are." In the medieval world, where hierarchy was a way of life, food became one of its most subtle and persistent voices. You did not need to declare your status aloud. It was there, in the bowl before you, in what you ate, in how you ate, in who served you, in whether you were allowed to sit. The meal was not just nourishment. It was position. It was signal. It was belonging. Let us begin with the most basic staple, bread. Bread was not one thing in the Middle Ages. It was a spectrum, a ladder, a quiet hierarchy rising from field to feast. At the very top, manchet, soft, white, refined, made from the finest wheat flour, sifted again and again to remove the bran. Its texture was smooth, its crust thin. It required the best grain, the cleanest water, and the hands of a skilled baker. It was baked for lords, ladies, priests, and wealthy merchants. To eat white bread was to show you did not work in the fields, that you could afford food that was not just made well, but made delicately. Below that came raveled bread, wheaten loaves, slightly coarser, still pleasant, often mixed with rye, eaten by craftsmen, clerks, households of modest standing. Then, at the bottom, maslin and black bread, dense, dark, made from a mix of grains, sometimes flavored with chaff or acorns when grain was scarce. This bread filled the bellies of laborers, peasants, serfs. It was nutritious. It sustained, but it crumbled. It grew stale quickly, and it marked your place. Even when it was served in abundance, even when fresh from the communal oven, you knew what your bread said about you. Next came meat. In a world where livestock was expensive, meat was not just a food, it was a statement. Beef, mutton, venison, and boar were symbols of the upper classes. Hunting ranks were limited. Game was for the nobility. To eat it, especially frequently, was to declare your status without words. Pork was more common, and among the peasantry, pigs were prized because they could eat almost anything and be slaughtered when needed. Still, meat was not daily fare for the poor. It was occasional, festive, a reward after harvest, a gift at a wedding. For the wealthy, however, it was a centerpiece. Roasted swans, redressed in feathers, sculpted pies, spilling with spiced meats. Feasts where entire animals were carved and served on silver trays. Meat did not just feed, it impressed. To offer it to a guest was to say, "I am generous, I am able, I am above want." And to receive it, seated at the head table, was to be seen. Then there were utensils. To eat with your hands was not shameful, but to eat cleanly with fine tools was admired. The poor used wooden spoons, if they had any. Fingers did the rest. The rich used knives, slim, elegant, carried at the belt, and eventually spoons of pewter or silver with decorated handles. Forks were rare, almost foreign, and not widely used in Europe until the late medieval period. To eat without staining your tunic, to pass food gracefully, to leave nothing scattered on the table. This was manners, and manners meant class. Even the way you sat mattered. Were you seated above the salt, closer to the Lord, near the center of power? Or below the salt, farther from the head, closer to the servants? The salt dish, placed near the lord of the manor, became an invisible boundary. Those above it ate finer foods, drank stronger wines, received more attention. Those below ... ate what remained. Now the Lord. His manor rises above the village, its windows glowing like lanterns. The great hall is tall, timber-bird warm with firelight. The floor is strewn with rushes, newly laid, sometimes with herbs crushed beneath the feet. Sweet flag, lavender, rosemary. Candles flicker. Tapestries hang on the walls, muffling the stone. A long table stretches down the hall, and on it, abundance. Roasted meats, beef, mutton, venison, laid out on silver platters. A whole capon, golden and steaming. Bowls of peas with mint, leeks and butter, onions baked in honey. Trenchers, thick slices of white bread, are laid beneath the meats, soaking up juices. Pitchers of wine, red, dark, sweetened with spices. Cups carved from horn or pewter or even silver clink gently as guests lift them. Servants move silently behind chairs. One pours, another carves, another clears. The Lord sits at the center. He eats with a knife, a spoon, and clean hands, carefully washed between courses, dried on linen. Music plays, a lute, a pipe, the low drum of feet tapping in time. A juggler performs. A falcon rests on a carved perch near the hearth. A guest shares a tale from distant lands. This is not only a meal, it is performance. A demonstration of wealth, hospitality, and power. And yet, for all its luxury, the Lord too must eat. He chews, he swallows, he grows full. He sighs. 2 meals, same hour, same land. One of necessity, the other of display. And yet, they are not disconnected, because the food on the noble's table has been sown, harvested, and raised by the hands of the serf. The bread that sops the meat was milled from grain grown in the village fields. The honey came from hives tended behind a peasant's hut. The pig was slaughtered by the hands of a man who never tasted pork more than once a season. Even the wine was pressed by someone unknown to the guest who drinks it. This is not injustice. They would say it is structure. The great chain of being, each in his place. But beneath the order, there is always awareness, a knowledge, soft and constant, that not all bowls are filled equally. And yet, hunger comes to all. In the winter, the serf's pottage grows thinner, but so does the noble's larder. If roads are snowed in, if traders are delayed, even the great hall learns absence. The Lord eats salted beef, preserved fruit, ale warmed with spice, but the freshness is gone. He dreams of spring, as does the serf, though for different reasons. He dreams of green shoots, of eggs in the henhouse, of the first herb gathered from the thawing ground. Both wait, both hunger, both pray. So now, picture them both, the Lord and the serf, leaning back in their chairs, their bellies filled in different ways. One by barley and cabbage, one by pheasant and pastry, but both warmed by the fire, both lulled by the quiet hum of evening, both human, both moral, both in the end simply ... fed. Their meals do not make them equal, but they make them real. And across the centuries, across the candles and the clay walls, we remember both. Because history does not belong only to the grand. It belongs also to the quiet, the hungry, the content. And at the edge of every feast, there is always a cottage where a child blows gently on a spoonful of soup and learns what it means to be full, if only for tonight. Imagine a single day somewhere in the countryside. The wind is cool, carrying the scent of earth and hay. Birds wheel in the sky, above fields stitched with furrows. A bell tolls in the distance, slow, deliberate. Now picture 2 homes. One stands high on a hill, stone-walled, thick-doored, windows glowing with firelight. The other sits low in a valley, its roof thatched, its hearth barely warm. In both homes, the hour is the same. Evening has come. It is time to eat. But what is served tells two very different stories. The medieval world was a world of contrast. Not always loud, not always violent, but constant. From the fabric of one's tunic to the contents of one's bowl, from the weight of one's spoon to the number of candles on a table. And nowhere was this contrast more quietly visible than at mealtime. The noble lord and the humble serf lived side by side, often within the same manor estate, one in the great hall, the other in a mud-floored cottage. They shared the same land, the same sky, but not the same supper. Let us step into both homes at the same moment, not to judge, not to linger on envy, but simply to see, to observe the rhythm of their lives through the food they knew. First, the serf. He has worked since dawn, his back bent to the soil, his hands rough with rope, hoe, and grain. The harvest has been fair this year, not abundant, not scarce. His home is small, a single room, walls of wattle and daub, a roof of thatch that drips in heavy rain. The hearth is built of stone, low and open. The fire smolders gently, smoke curling into the rafters. There is no chimney, only a hole in the roof. The air is heavy with wood smoke and damp wool. His wife tends the pot, stirring slowly. It holds pottage, as always. Barley, cabbage, a few root vegetables from the garden, and a little onion. There is no meat tonight. There rarely is. Sometimes a bone, left from a gift or a lucky trade, is boiled to lend the broth a whisper of fat. Bread is sliced, no forks, hard, coarse, dark with rye and bran. Baked 3 days ago, still edible, but not soft. A wooden bowl is filled. Each person receives a portion. No plates, only fingers, spoons, and silence. The children sit on the floor. The oldest eats quickly, the youngest slowly, each one understanding that waste is not a concept in this house. Nothing goes untouched. There is no wine, but there is ale, home-brewed, thin, barely fermented, cloudy in the cup, but safer than the water. They eat, without ceremony, without talk, not from sadness, but from habit. The serf does not resent the meal. It is what he knows. And tonight, it is enough. Spices arrived in the kitchens of the wealthy, carefully portioned, weighed like jewels. They were stored in locked boxes, wrapped in parchment, placed on high shelves where light could not fade them. In noble feasts, they were used to dazzle. Spiced wine called hypocras, pastries flavored with ginger and clove, sauces with mustard and pepper to accompany game meats. Even savory dishes leaned sweet. A chicken might be stewed with dates and cinnamon, beef dressed in raisins and vinegar. The lines between salty and sweet were blurred, because flavor, intense, unexpected, layered, was the goal. In royal courts, spices were displayed, not just in food, but in menus, in recipes written for show, to impress foreign guests, to prove reach and power. To serve a dish with sugar and spice was to say, I have touched the world and brought it to this table. But even in monasteries, spices had a place. Not in indulgence, but in remedy. Clove eased toothaches. Ginger soothed the belly. Nutmeg calmed nerves. Peppercorns were crushed, steeped, sipped. The apothecary and the kitchen were not far apart. In medieval thought, food was medicine, not just sustenance, but balance for the humors of the body. So monks grew herbs and used imported spices with care, logging them in dusty ledgers with notes like, taken at night with broth, may ease melancholy. For the poor, spices were mostly rumor, a smell in the air when nobles passed. A gift, rarely, a pinch of saffron in a wedding dish, a bit of ginger in a holy day bread. But sometimes, traders and cooks would pass along small amounts. And a peasant stew, of beans, of roots, might, once in a season, taste of something more. And for a moment, they would taste not just warmth, but distance. The journey of the spice became the journey of the tongue. And in one spoonful, they traveled further than their feet ever would. The spice trade was also danger. Ships were lost, caravans robbed, traders cheated. But still, the spices came. Because they mattered. Because they colored a world that was often gray. Because they softened winters, warmed broth, turned bread from bitter to better. Because they were memory, tucked into a pouch, released in the steam of a cooking pot. So tonight, as you rest, imagine a single grain of pepper. Imagine the hands that picked it, the baskets it passed through, the long road it traveled. And now, imagine it falling, gently, into a pot of stew, hundreds of years ago, in a room lit only by fire. One pinch, one journey, one taste from far away. Imagine for a moment that you are not in a cottage or a hall or a monastery kitchen. Instead, you are standing at the edge of a harbor. Wooden ships rocking gently in the tide, sails creaking, ropes thick with salt. Somewhere inside the cargo hold, tucked into wax-sealed pouches and carved wooden boxes, is a handful of golden threads. A few dried berries. A pouch of powder so light it escapes when touched. It has traveled further than you ever will. And yet, tonight, it will touch your tongue. In the Middle Ages, spices were more than seasoning. They were treasure, medicine, mystery, flavors from unseen lands that whispered of deserts and jungles, markets crowded with camels and silt, and long journeys across mountains and seas. To taste pepper, cinnamon, or clove was not simply to flavor a meal. It was to reach across the world with your tongue. These were not everyday ingredients. They were exceptions, symbols, prayers in powder, and they carried with them the story of a global web, quiet, patient, astonishing, known now as the spice route. Let us follow one spice now, not in haste, but in reverence. Let us trace the journey of pepper. Tiny, wrinkled, black orbs, dried berries from the Piper nigrum plant, native to India's Malabar coast. There, in the humid shade, the vines grow tall, reaching toward the trees, producing clusters of berries that are plucked green and dried under the sun, turning black and pungent with heat. From India, they travel by sea, down the coast, past Ceylon, around the Horn of Arabia, through the Red Sea or the Persian Gulf, then overland to ports like Alexandria, Acre, or Constantinople. At each stop, taxes, trades, pauses. Spices move like whispers, never rushed, never shouted. Then onto ships again, sailing the Mediterranean, through pirate waters and merchant agreements, to the markets of Venice, Genoa, or Marseille. And from there, by cart, by pack mule, by river barge, pepper reaches the kitchens of Europe. A journey of thousands of miles, across mountains, deserts, oceans, and language. All for a pinch, a dash, a handful. And why? Because it was worth it. Pepper wasn't just pungent, it preserved. It masked the flavor of meat on slightly off. It added depth to broths. It brought warmth to the cold months of winter. It made food feel different, and different, in a world of routine, was luxury. But pepper wasn't alone. There was cinnamon, not the curled sticks we know today, but paper-thin bark, delicate and fragrant, harvested from trees in Sri Lanka, peeled and dried by hand. There was clove, the dried flower bud of a tropical tree, grown on the Maluku Islands, the spice islands of Indonesia. Clove was warm, sweet, numbing. It flavored wine. It cured pain. It perfumed breath. There was nutmeg, a seed from the Banda Islands, encased in a red lace called mace, 2 spices from one fruit. There was ginger, cardamom, turmeric, and the most precious of all, saffron. golden threads plucked from the heart of a purple crocus, each flower yielding only 3 strands. It took thousands to fill an ounce. Saffron did not travel as far. It could be grown in Spain, Italy, southern France, but it was no less valued. For color, for fragrance, for the way it turned rice or broth into gold. Let us imagine a Friday evening in a medieval village. The bell rings from the chapel, not to summon, but to remind. The meal tonight is fish, dried herring, soaked all day in a basin, then grilled on a slab of stone. It crackles in the firelight, the skin curling. There is a little vinegar, sharp, to cut the salt. A piece of bread, a handful of bitter greens. You chew slowly, not because you're sad, but because there is peace in simplicity. Your stomach may not feel full, but your mind does not race. There is silence at the table, and something gentle in the way no one speaks of what's missing. Not all fasts were long. Some lasted a day, others a week. Some were personal, assigned by a confessor after penance. Others were communal, entire towns fasting together before Easter, before battles, before coronations. And when the fast ended, when the bell rang again, the feast began, not always with extravagance, but with relief, with celebration. A roast, a pie, cheese, eggs, cream, all returned like long-lost friends, but never without gratitude, because absence had made their presence sweeter. There were exceptions, of course: the ill, the very young, pregnant women, travelers, workers whose labor was extreme. The church allowed leniency, but the people often did not ask for it. They saw fasting not as hardship, but as part of the year, like winter or harvest or planting, something to endure, to mark time, to remind them that fullness is not constant, and hunger is not always a curse. And so, as you imagine these quiet meals, the stew without meat, the bread without butter, the soup without fat, remember that they were not meals of lack, but meals of intention. They carried not just flavor, but meaning. A reminder that not every appetite must be satisfied, and not every table needs abundance to feel complete. There is a kind of holiness in restraint. And in every fast, every quiet bowl, every spoon dipped in thin broth, there was a whisper of that sacred rhythm, the one that balanced joy with denial, feasting with silence, hunger with faith. And so they fasted, and so they remembered, and so they waited for the next feast, for the return of meat, for the warmth of butter melting on warm bread. And in the waiting, they found something fuller than fullness itself. Imagine a long table, set simply, wooden bowls, coarse bread, a single jug of water. Outside, the sun is shining, and the fields are full. The sheep are fat, the hens are laying. And yet, no one eats the meat. No butter is served, no milk is poured. Not because it isn't there, but because it isn't time. This is a fast day, and fasting in the Middle Ages was not absence. It was order. Food is not just nourishment. It is symbol. It is rhythm. And in the medieval world, it was also submission to faith, to structure, to something larger than the hunger of the body. To understand what people were allowed to eat, we must also understand when and why they were told not to. The Christian calendar was not merely spiritual, it was culinary. Nearly half the year was marked by restrictions on food, not only the grand season of Lent, but also Advent, Ember Days, Rogation Days, and every Friday. Each fast came with its own rules, its own meanings, its own quiet negotiation between desire and discipline. The most well-known was Lent, the 40 days leading to Easter, a time to mirror Christ's fasting in the wilderness, to simplify, to strip down, to turn inward. During this time, and on many Fridays throughout the year, meat was forbidden, but not all flesh. The line was drawn, carefully, sometimes confusingly, between animals that walked on land and those that swam in water. Fish, therefore, was acceptable. So were creatures that lived in water but didn't quite fit the modern category. Beavers, for example, with their slick tails and aquatic habits, were, in some regions, permitted during fasts. Otters, too. Barnacle geese, once believed to hatch from driftwood and live at sea, were often classified as fish for religious purposes. These were not mistakes. They were loopholes, sanctioned ambiguities, and they were used not to break the fast, but to keep it bearable. Let us walk now into a small monastery kitchen during Lent. There is no butter, no cream, no eggs, no pork simmering over the fire. Instead, a pot of beans and leeks stirred with care. A loaf of barley bread, dense and dry. And perhaps, if the garden has given enough, a handful of herbs, parsley, sorrel, chervil, to lighten the flavor. The cook does not see fasting as punishment. He sees it as pattern. A different kind of meal, a softer sound. He peels the onions more slowly. He stirs more gently. He watches the broth as it thickens, knowing it will never be rich. But that is the point. Fasting was not starvation. It was intentional limitation. It was a way to make room for prayer, for gratitude, for remembering that not all hunger is bad. In noble homes, the approach was different, but not absent. Lords and ladies observed the fast, but their kitchens adapted with creativity. Fish pies filled with pike, eel, and perch, spiced and layered beneath a crust made with oil instead of lard. Almond milk substituted for cow's milk, produced by soaking ground almonds in water, then pressing out the liquid. It was expensive, laborious, but allowed. Eggs, though forbidden, were mimicked. Cooks created fake eggs using almond paste for the white and saffron-colored jelly for the yolk. A clever illusion. Not deceit, but devotion, shaped into art. The church did not design fasting to harm. It designed it to discipline, to remind. The body, they believed, was not evil, but it needed control. And nothing was more immediate, more primal than appetite. By curbing what you ate, you quieted your flesh and cleared a path for reflection. Even peasants followed the fasts, though often with resignation more than reverence. For many, there was little meat to give up. Still, they avoided butter on Fridays. They did not slaughter chickens during Lent. They made do with pottage, with bread soaked in broth, with onions and herbs. There was little to rebel against, but still they followed, because it was the way. But cookbooks did not belong only to royalty. In abbeys and manors, cooks kept kitchen books, not always formal, but notebooks of what worked, what pleased, what lasted. Sometimes just lists. Lentils for Tuesday. Bread baked thinner for the child. Add nutmeg only for the priest's dish. More water in the barley. Less in winter. No decoration. No poetry. Just notes from a life lived in service to food. These too are cookbooks, no less important, perhaps even more honest. Let us pause now and imagine this. You sit at a small wooden table, a recipe in front of you, the letters curled and faded, the ink smudged, the parchment warm under your hand. You read slowly. Take apples and pare them. Slice them and fry in good butter. Cast over them sugar and cinnamon. Let cool. Simple, comforting. A dish that might not change the world, but might remind someone they are alive. You close your eyes. You imagine slicing the apple, the scent rising, the sugar melting, the warmth in your fingers. It is not grand, but it is real, and that, in its own way, is holy. So when we read these old cookbooks, we are not chasing novelty. We are tracing hands. We are feeling the warmth of a kitchen fire long extinguished. And we are hearing, very softly, the voice of someone who once stood barefoot on a stone floor, stirring a pot, hoping to get it right. The past does not speak loudly, but when it speaks through food, it speaks with intimacy. And in the fragile pages of a medieval cookbook, we are invited not to observe history, but to taste it, one careful line at a time. Now picture yourself in a small chamber lit by candlelight. The stone walls are cool, the windows narrow, and the only sound is the scratch of a quill moving across parchment. A monk, or a clerk, dips the nib again into the inkwell, then carefully forms each letter. He is copying a recipe, not for indulgence, not for art, but to preserve quietly the knowledge of how to feed another long after he himself has turned to dust. We do not often think of cookbooks as historical documents, and yet they are among the most intimate records of a civilization. They tell not only what people ate, but how they thought about food, what they valued in a dish, how much effort they gave to pleasure, how much restraint they showed in preparation. Medieval cookbooks are not printed. They are handwritten, copied, compiled, passed from monk to cook, noble to steward, from abbey to castle. The pages are thick, vellum or parchment, soft to the touch, uneven at the edge. The ink has browned over time, the corners smudged by fingers long gone. Let us open one now, slowly. Let the binding creak just a little. Let the dust settle back onto the desk, and read. One of the earliest known English cookbooks is called The Foam of Cury, written in the 14th century, during the reign of King Richard II. Cury, in this case, means cookery, and the book is not meant for the poor. It is a record of courtly cuisine, intended for the royal kitchens, where meals were not just food, but theater. And yet, within these pages, there is quiet. There are no photographs, no calorie counts, no lists of tools. Just gentle instructions, often vague, sometimes poetic. One recipe reads, "Take good broth and do in an earthen pot. Take flour of pain de main and make thereof passed with water, and make therein pellets as great as apples, and cast them in the boiling broth." Pellets, as great as apples. No weights, no measures, no oven temperatures. You are expected to know, to feel, to watch for texture, for timing, for smell. It is cooking by memory, not for replication, but for continuation. Many recipes begin with the word take. Take almond milk and put therein sugar, ... Take capon and roast him and smite him in pieces. Take flour and water and make a crust as thick as thine arm. Each take is not a command. It is a gentle suggestion, a guiding hand from the past, nudging you into rhythm. And what you find in these books is not just stew and bread, but complex sauces, flavored with cloves, galangal, cinnamon, and ginger. Almond milk appears again and again, not from a market bottle, but made by hand. Ground almonds soaked and pressed, then stirred into broths and custards, used especially during fast days when milk from animals was forbidden. Verjuice, a sharp liquid made from unripe grapes or crab apples, gives many dishes their tang, a medieval substitute for vinegar or lemon. And saffron, bright and golden, is used not only for color, but for warmth. There are pastries filled with dates and figs, mixed with breadcrumbs and wine, spiced and sealed in dough. There are meat pies, their crusts called coffins, not to be eaten, but to hold the contents while they baked in the oven. There are recipes for custards, for roasted swan, for pea pottage, for pigeon in parsley sauce. One recipe advises boiling eggs so gently that the white sets, but the yolk stays running as the sun. Another suggests serving fish with a green sauce of sorrel and vinegar to rouse the appetite. The language is old, but the sentiment is familiar. Flavor matters. Texture matters. Care matters. Yet these cookbooks are not only English. In France, there is Liendier, attributed to Guillaume Terrel, known as Tailvant, a cook to the kings of France. His book contains hundreds of recipes, some elaborate, others spare, but all reminding us that food was part of the cultural language of power, precision, and beauty. In Italy, Libro della Cucina offers simpler fare, often vegetarian, with an emphasis on herbs, grains, and technique. In the Arab world, cookbooks from Baghdad in the 10th and 11th centuries contain rich, detailed instructions, far earlier than those in Europe, featuring rice dishes, stuffed vegetables, spiced meats, and sweets perfumed with rosewater and musk. These recipes traveled, along with spice and trade, blending into the cookpots of medieval Europe. And in these pages, we see a kind of conversation. Across borders, across kitchens, across centuries. They find gnawed bones with tooth marks, not from dogs, but from people. Because sometimes the hunger lingered longer than the broth. They find shells from mussels and periwinkles in unexpected places, inland towns, far from the sea. This tells a story of trade, of carts bringing barrels of brine, of salted delicacies, eaten slowly and then forgotten, but remembered by the earth. In one midden, near the ruins of an abbey, they find a layered dump, centuries thick. Each stratum is a different chapter. The deeper, the older. In the oldest layer, bones of wild animals, deer, boar, hare, hunting, pre-agricultural, the remnants of a forest life. Then, above it, the bones change. Domesticated pig, chicken, goat. A shift in society, farming, ownership, settling. Then pottery shards glazed with marks from cutlery. Not everyone ate with fingers anymore. In the most recent layer, more refined waste, fewer bones. More bread crusts, fruit seeds, cheese rinds. The evolution of appetite, of economy, of the kinds of food that didn't require knives, just fire and patience. All of this layered not in books, but in soil. Even latrines tell stories. In castle keeps, in monasteries, in merchant towns, waste pits reveal more than just biology. They hold cherry pits, mustard seeds, peppercorns, parsley stems, and even grape skins, spices, fruits, things that passed through bodies and into earth, now unearthed centuries later. In one case, they find a plum stone with a bite mark still visible. The flesh gone, of course, but the gesture remains, of someone biting deep, tossing the pit away, never knowing it would be studied by future hands. Archaeologists are gentle. They do not pry. They do not take. They listen. They catalog each fragment. They record its location, its angle, its depth. They draw maps not of geography, but of daily life. And slowly, a picture emerges, not of grand banquets, but of ordinary meals. How many fish were eaten? What kinds of birds were most common? How coarse was the bread? Was the pig old or young? Was it raised or hunted? The answers lie in bones, in seeds, in burnt crumbs that once stuck to a pot. And so, when we tried to understand the medieval diet, we looked not to paintings or poems, but to what was left behind. Because people do not always tell the truth in their writing. But the earth never lies. It preserves what we try to forget. A fish bone beneath a butcher's stall. A cracked egg shell near a hearth. A pit from a pear, eaten in the shade of a wall. Each one says quietly, someone lived here. Someone was hungry. Someone was full. Someone cooked this. Someone shared this. And then they went on. So now, let your mind rest gently on these forgotten things. The tiny bone curled in a midden. The shell pressed deep into the earth. The echo of chewing in a pit of ash. And know that even the simplest lives, unmarked by history, unnamed in records, still left behind a feast of memory. All we had to do, was listen. Now imagine a place beneath your feet, still, cold, covered in centuries of quiet. There is no light there, no noise, only the long patience of earth holding its secrets. And yet, when disturbed, gently, carefully, with hands that know how to listen, the past speaks, not in voices, but in bones, in pits, in tiny scraps of meals once shared and forgotten. When you picture medieval food, you might think of a table, a bowl, a pot, a plate. But there are other places, quieter, darker, where the truth of what people ate still lingers. The garbage pit, the midden, the compost heap behind the cottage, the trench beneath the castle kitchen, the broken shards left in silence and soil. These are not glamorous places, but they are honest. Their breath rises like smoke. They hold brushes, trowels, and soft tools made not to dig, but to uncover. And they speak with the clear certainty of things that were never meant to be remembered, only discarded. And that is why they endure. Somewhere in the English countryside, a team of archaeologists kneels in the soft morning mist. They are not looking for gold, not for swords or crowns. They are looking for bones, tiny ones, fish bones, chicken bones, pig teeth, and oyster shells, curled like broken moons. Peach pits split down the middle, the burnt corner of a bread loaf, fossilized in ash. Each one is a whisper, each one a sentence in a story told in fragments. And that story is food. Not imagined food, not romanticized, but the real food of real people, chewed, sucked clean, tossed aside. In one layer, they find cattle bone, split lengthwise. Why split? To reach the marrow inside, not for a stew, not for indulgence, for calories, for survival. A thigh bone, broken not by accident, but by practiced force. Near it, a burnt seed, blackened, hard, still shaped like barley. It had fallen into a fire, perhaps from a careless hand, or a gust of wind. No one bothered to retrieve it. And so it remained, hidden beneath layers of ash until now. Elsewhere, a cooking pot, cracked, its edge worn smooth. Traces of residue line its walls. With chemical testing, they discover onion compounds, fat from pork, starch from legumes, and something more subtle, herbs, perhaps fennel or savory, now only molecules. This pot did not tell a legend. It told a meal, a stew likely, shared, stirred, eaten on a cold evening when the sky was low and the fields were bare. Bones tell us more than just what was eaten. They tell us how much. In noble homes, archaeologists find beef bones, large, intact, sometimes discarded with meat still on them. This was abundance. This was a meal that left leftovers. Bones too large to break by hand, tossed with indifference into the trench. In peasant villages, they find small birds, bones of blackbirds, thrushes, sometimes hedgehogs. Creatures not farmed, but caught. Not prized, but used. Every part eaten. Every scrap scraped clean. The baker belongs to a guild, not just a trade, but a fraternity. The guild protects him, ensures prices are fair, weight is honest, flour is clean. It also binds him to standards, to inspections, to dues. If a loaf is found underweight, or if flour is hoarded, there are consequences. But the baker is proud. He does not cheat. Each loaf is weighed by feel, its heft known in his palm like the weight of a newborn. He teaches his apprentice, a boy with flour-smudged cheeks, how to score a loaf with confidence, how to test for hollow sound, how to feel when dough is ready, not by time, but by tension and texture. There are no recipes on parchment, only memory, only muscle, only repetition. As noon approaches, the rush slows. Most have bought their bread. The flour is swept. The oven cools. The paddles leaned against the wall. The baker wipes his brow with his sleeve. His arms ache pleasantly. His clothes are dusted with flour. His face is lined with heat. He sits for the first time. A single roll in his hand, the smallest, the one that split during baking. He bites. It is crisp outside, soft within, slightly sour, perfect. No table. He eats in silence, no feast. Just him, the oven, the heat fading slowly behind stone walls. When evening comes, he will prepare again, because bread is not a once-a-week task. Rhythmic, it is daily, relentless, as essential as the church bell or the draw of water. The baker does not see himself as special. The care, the repetition, the quiet dignity of a man whose gift is not glamour, but consistency. But he is, because his hands hold the hunger of a town. He is there before the day begins. He is the first scent to greet the morning, and often the last light in the window before sleep. So now, as the loaves cool and the shadows lengthen, you can hear it, the heartbeat of a town baked into crust and crumb. And as your mind rests, imagine yourself holding that warm bread, freshly torn, the steam rising like a whispered blessing ... And know for a moment that you are full. Imagine yourself in the dark just before dawn, not in the countryside this time, but in the narrow streets of a medieval town. The stones beneath your feet are cold, damp from the night air. The city is not awake, not fully. But one scent cuts through the silence. Bread, warm, thick, ancient. You follow it to a heavy door, already cracked open, golden light spilling through. And behind it, a man is working. Before the sun warms the rooftops, before roosters caw, before bells toll from the church tower, the baker is already covered in flour. He works by firelight, the flames low and steady in the large communal oven that will take hours to reach the right heat. The smell inside his shop is dense and comforting. Yeast and wood smoke, damp linen and ash, the tang of fermenting dough, all mingling into something primal. He doesn't rush. He cannot. The dough will not be rushed. It is alive, and like all living things, it responds to patience. The baker begins with grains, but not from his own field. He is no farmer. His trade is different, one of measure, heat, and time. A miller has already ground the grain. He opens one now, his hands disappearing into its white cloud. A sifter has already separated the bran. The baker pays for flour, often dear, sometimes gritty, depending on the mill, the harvest, and the season. The flour comes in sacks, heavy, coarse, sometimes damp with the breath of the river it traveled beside. Then comes water, cold from the well, drawn before others are awake. He pours it in slowly, the sound like soft rainfall in the wooden trough. A bit of dough from yesterday, fermented and bubbling. A sour scent. The baker feeds it, nurtures it. It is as essential as fire. He adds salt, precious and measured. And yeast, though not from a packet. Yeast is caught, cultured, shared. He mixes with his arms, not a spoon. Forearms deep, folding, turning, pressing. The dough resists. He presses harder. It sticks to his knuckles, gathers under fingernails, softens with every push. The rhythm of kneading is old. It does not change. There is no dial to check. Only instinct. Only knowledge passed from father to son, apprentice to master. Push, fold, turn, press. If it browns and smokes lightly, it is ready. Again and again, until the dough sighs under his hands, becoming smooth, pliant, willing. He places it under linen. It must rise. It must rest, even as he does not. The oven is the baker's other heart. It is made of stone and clay, built into the wall, shaped like a low, domed cave. Inside, the flames leap and recede, licking the curve of the ceiling, heating the walls slowly, thoroughly. He tests the heat with ash and intuition, tossing a handful of flour on the stone. If it blackens, the oven is too hot. He rakes out the coals, brushes the floor clean. The oven now holds no fire, but heat, deep, steady, and invisible. He shapes the dough, not into perfect loaves, but into the shapes the town expects. Flat rounds for the poor, thick, heavy, sustaining. Long loaves for those with coin, softer, sometimes whiter, if the flour allows. Sweet rolls rarely, only on feast days, and with dried fruit, if he can afford it. Each loaf is marked, a cut, a cross, a line. Not for beauty, but for identity. They stop, noses pressed to wood, hoping for crumbs or kindness. In towns where ovens are shared, each family's bread must be marked. You bring your dough to the baker. He bakes it for a fee. He remembers your mark. The oven door opens. Loaves go in, placed quickly, carefully. The heat greets them without words. As the bread bakes, the town begins to stir. Boots on cobbles, or a jug of milk, or a pair of eggs. Hinges creaking. Vendors setting up stalls. Children run past the bakery window. They know the smell. The baker opens the shutters. Steam spills out. The first loaves are done. He lifts them with a long-handled paddle, a peel, smooth with use. Each loaf lands on the table with a soft thump. Their crusts crackle as they cool. The sound is quiet, but alive, like rain falling on warm stone. A woman arrives. A linen-wrapped basket in her arms. She trades a coin for a loaf. Not all payments are money. The baker keeps careful note of what is owed, and by whom. He hands her the bread, still warm. She holds it close to her chest. A smile barely formed her lips. After the meal, bowls are washed. The bread scraps saved for birds or the poor. Nothing is discarded casually. Leftovers are returned to the pot. The fire is banked. The kitchen is swept. And the cook returns to his garden. Among the rows of beets, borage, and broad beans, he walks slowly. He touches each leaf, picks off pests, waters dry soil with careful hands. This garden is small, but it is his library. Each plant a line of scripture in green. There are feast days, of course, holy days when the meals are a little richer. Then, the cook may bake almond tarts, sweetened slightly with honey, made from pressed meal and the milk of ground nuts. Or serve a pottage with dried fruit, apples, currants, plums soaked and stirred into the stew to soften the edges of lentils. But even in celebration, simplicity reigns. He never oversteps. He never dazzles. Because the goal is not satisfaction. It is humility. To eat simply, gratefully, quietly, is to acknowledge one's place in the order of things. At night, the kitchen is dark. The pot is empty, cleaned with sand and water. The floor swept again. His spoon rests nearby, polished from years of use. The cook sits near the hearth, reading a psalm by candlelight. The flame flickers gently. He does not think of legacy. He does not worry whether the world will remember his meals. He does not consider himself important, but he is, because he is the keeper of rhythm, the steward of daily grace, the silent voice that says, again and again, you may eat, you may rest. And in this quiet monastery, surrounded by stone and shadow and silence, a small pot continues to simmer. The cook's work is not grand, but it is good. And in each humble spoonful, there is warmth, not of spice or sugar, but of intention, of care, of peace. When morning returns, he will rise again, chop leeks, stir grain, kneel by the hearth. He will feed the body, so that others may feed the soul. And in that quiet offering, made day after day after day, he reminds us that not all sacred things are silent prayers. Some are bowls of stew, carried gently to a waiting table. Picture yourself standing at the edge of a cloister, early morning, just before lauds. The grass is still silvered with dew. Bells echo softly across stone courtyards. A crow calls once, then vanishes into silence. Behind a thick wooden door, warm steam curls through narrow windows. Inside, a man stirs a pot. He is not a chef. He is not a servant. He is something quieter, a monastic cook. preparing not just food, prime at sunrise, sext at noon, compline at night, but continuity. In the rhythm of medieval life, there were few places more consistent than the monastery. Here, days were carved not by sunlight or season, but by prayer. Matins before dawn. A slow procession of hours, stitched together with silence, scripture, and work. And yet, even within this order, there was hunger. Even monks, with their calloused hands and lowered eyes, needed to eat. But food in a monastery was more than sustenance. It was discipline, it was balance, it was ritual. Let us step softly now into the kitchen. The cook is awake before the others. He rises not to a cock's crow or a bell, but to habit. His robes are simple, coarse wool belted with a cord. His face is lined, not with worry, but with years of knowing what must be done. The kitchen is long, low, and cool. Its walls are stone, thick, gray, unmoving. There is a hearth, always burning. An iron pot suspended by chain. A worn table, smooth with use. A small window, just large enough for light to spill in, pale and cold. There are no copper pans here. No sugar, no spice, no scented herbs for indulgence. Only the plain gifts of the monastery garden. The cook moves without rush. He lifts a basket of leeks, still wet from the morning harvest. He peels parsnips with a small, sharp knife, the shavings curling like paper. He crushes lentils with a stone, stirs them into water, sets them to boil. Everything has a rhythm. Nothing is wasted. Each step is quiet, as if to avoid disturbing the stillness of the prayers echoing through the walls. The monastic rule, the rule of Saint Benedict, is clear. No excess. No flesh of four-legged beasts. Simple meals at regular times with gratitude and restraint. For monks, food is not for pleasure, but for the body's minimal need, so the soul can remain focused on higher things. But that does not mean the cook is careless. In fact, he is precise, because even humble food, prepared with attention, becomes a kind of offering. In one corner of the kitchen sits a grinding stone. Next to it, sacks of barley, rye, and emmer wheat. Each grain must be measured, soaked, ground, sifted. The flour, though coarse, will be made into small round loaves, thick-crusted and dense, to last several days. He cuts cabbage, sprinkles in dried marjoram from a clay pot on the shelf, adds a pinch of salt, carefully measured, sparingly used. The salt is valuable, brought by cart from coastal traders, and shared in strict quantities. Sometimes there is fish, dried or pickled, caught from nearby rivers or delivered by local peasants as a form of tithe. On Fridays, during Lent, or in long periods of fasting, the fish becomes the central dish. Salted herring, soaked overnight, grilled gently over the fire, wrapped in leaves. The cook does not taste as he works. He has no interest in indulgence. But he remembers. He remembers texture, timing, and flame. A piece of bread, a small cup of watered wine or ale. He adjusts not from craving, but from reverence. As the sun lifts, the monks gather. They do not speak. In the refectory, the dining hall, they enter in pairs. Each takes his place on the bench. Bowls are set before them, wooden, identical, a ladle of stew. There are no greetings, no stories, just the scrape of spoons, the swallow of broth, the quiet murmur of scripture being read aloud by a single monk from the pulpit. Even mealtime is wrapped in contemplation. The cook does not eat with them. He stands to the side, hands folded, watching, not for praise, but to ensure the food serves its purpose. No one complains. No one asks for more. But he sees who leaves the bowl untouched, who eats slowly, who smiles after swallowing. He stores these things away, not in words, but in muscle memory. Tomorrow's stew will reflect today's silence. Markets fell silent. because what was there to sell? Mills stopped grinding because there was nothing to mill. Even theft slowed because there was nothing to steal. In the towns, bread riots erupted, quick, desperate scrambles for what little grain remained. Bakers were threatened. Merchants hoarded sacks of wheat behind barred doors. Children disappeared from crowds. No one could say where they had gone. On the roads, people wandered. Not travelers, not pilgrims, but the displaced, families who had sold their homes or fled them in search of food. Some reached monasteries, some did not. The monks, for all their devotion, had only so much grain in their cellars. The church declared days of prayer. Processions marched through towns. People wept, sang, confessed. But the rain did not stop, and the earth did not answer. In places, desperation turned dark. It is whispered, quietly, gently, that some ate what they should not. The bodies of the dead, the newborn abandoned, the impossible made possible by starvation. But we do not linger there. We move past, as the villagers did, because there was no poetry in that kind of hunger. Only silence. More often, families simply shrunk. An elder who stopped eating so others might. A child who slipped away in sleep. A mother who closed her eyes and never woke. They were not mourned with ceremony. There was no linen for wrapping, no candles left to burn, just a shallow grave and a prayer said under breath. And yet, somehow, through this gray stretch of years, some endured. Not because of strength, but luck. Not because of wealth, but timing. A late rain that allowed one last harvest. A kind neighbor who shared what little they had. A patch of wild nettles behind a barn. A trade made on a muddy road. A crust exchanged for cloth. And in 1318, the rain finally relented. The skies cleared, not immediately, not dramatically, but the sun returned in pieces, like scattered coins on a table. Fields began to dry. Seeds took root again. Cows birthed calves. Grain swayed once more beneath wind. The famine ended not with fanfare, but with green. Slowly, cautiously, they tilled the soil as if it might betray them once more. They planted, but with new reverence. They shared when they could. And they remembered, not in words, but in the way they never let the pot run completely dry again. The first shoots of new life, fragile, short, but full of promise. And in the stillness after hunger, people began to live again. The great famine left no monuments, no battlefields to tour, no grand paintings, just empty spaces and family lines, and a generation that would carry its echo, quiet, hollow, and deep, for the rest of their lives. And yet, life returned, for bread, in bowls licked clean, in spoons resting in empty pots, in fields that, at last, remembered how to grow again, for the next day, because it always does. The body, even in frailty, reaches for warmth. And now, centuries later, when we step into the past and listen for the sounds of hunger, we find them not in screams, but in soft silences. Imagine rain that does not stop, not a storm, not a flood, but a cold, gray drizzle, endless, quiet, unrelenting. The kind of rain that seeps into walls, into shoes, into skin. The kind of rain that ruins everything slowly, not with violence, but with stillness. Farmers looked up, frowned slightly, but continued their work. The earth had known wet seasons before. They adjusted their planting, whispered to one another in fields, shook water from their sleeves, but they did not fear. The kind of rain that turned soil to sludge, seed to rot, and hope to memory. It began with clouds, unremarkable at first, a spring of damp wind and gray skies. Not yet. Then came summer. The sky had forgotten how to be blue. And so, the land forgot how to feed, and the sun never arrived. Fields remained soaked. Grain sprouted too early, then drowned. Roots turned soft beneath the soil. animals, hooves deep in mud, grew thin. A peasant family had no surplus, no pantry of reserves. The grain grown one year was carefully stored, measured, and rationed to last until the next harvest. If that harvest failed, even once, you dipped into that store. If it failed again, you began to vanish. Across much of Northern Europe, in the year 1315, the rhythm of life changed, not suddenly, but with a kind of slow ache. We call it now the Great Famine, a quiet catastrophe that lasted for years, not with the shock of war, but with the slow, gnawing erosion of nourishment. To understand this famine, you must first understand how fragile the line was between fullness and hunger in the medieval world. And in 1315, the harvest failed. Not a plague pit, just a field and a home. Then, in 1316, it failed again. And in 1317, it faltered once more. For 3 years, the seasons did not follow the script. Rain fell when it should not. Frost bit when it was least expected. And the earth, so often relied upon without question, became silent. Let us walk now through a village in that time. Not a battlefield, a small cottage with its fire growing dim. Inside, a mother stirs a pot with nothing in it. Once it held barley, then roots, then weeds, now water. She stirs out of habit, not hope. A child sits near the fire, no longer asking for food, to bark, because the asking has gone unanswered too many times. It filled the stomach, barely, but it scraped the throat. It offered no energy, and it darkened the teeth. Their cheeks are hollow, their hands still, their breath shallow but even. Outside, a man kneels in the field, touching the soil with his palm. It is wet. It is useless. He knows this. He knew it yesterday, but he still checks, because some part of him must. There are no birds in the sky, no fresh footprints on the road. Even hunger moves slowly now. The food, when it existed, changed. Bread, that staple, that comfort, became something else. With no grain to grind, people turned to husks, yes, bark. It could be dried, ground fine, mixed with straw or pea flour, and formed into a thin, bitter loaf. Other meals disappeared. Dairy animals died, too weak to graze. Eggs vanished from nests left empty. Salted meat was gone, already eaten or too expensive to touch. People ate grass, chewed it until their mouths foamed. They dug for roots they didn't know the names of. They foraged for snails, beetles, worms. Not because they wanted to, because their bodies insisted. And slowly they began to waste. Not from poison, not from violence, but from the absence of enough. Now, imagine a different kind of fire. Not the hearth in a peasant's cottage, but torches flickering in high halls. Walls of stone, ceilings lost in shadow. The scent is not barley and ash, but spiced meat, clove-studded wine, and the subtle wax of bees' candles. The tables are long, the company powerful. And at the center of it all sits a woman who understood that food could feed more than the body. It could feed a kingdom. From her childhood, she was surrounded by poetry and stone, knights and olive trees, troubadours singing of love that bloomed even when it should not. The name of Eleanor of Aquitaine lingers in history like perfume left on a silk glove, delicate, unmistakable, and more powerful than first assumed. She was not born to obscurity. Eleanor came into the world in 1122, daughter of the Duke of Aquitaine, a land vast, rich and fragrant with wine, olives, and salt marshes. But Eleanor was no ornament. She would become Queen of France, then Queen of England, and far more than a queen, a strategist, a mother of kings, and a force of quiet transformation. We will not recount her wars or her pilgrimages tonight. A castle hall in Poitiers. The torches are already lit. It was display. This is how far my reach extends. This is who answers when I call. Instead, let us sit quietly beside one of her many tables. The table is being set, not for a meal, but for a statement. And listen to the way she used the meal to shape the world around her. It is evening, but wheat sifted and milled fine, kneaded with oil, baked in ovens tended only by those who knew. These spices traveled thousands of miles to reach her table, tucked into camel caravans, traded across oceans, wrapped in bolts of cloth, or hidden in chests. It rests on silver platters, in delicate slices. White bread was not just tastier. It was cleaner, higher, reserved for the noble, for the few. Stone walls hold the echo of boots on flagstone. Servants move like shadows. In the high Middle Ages, a feast was not indulgence. Few eat these dishes. Most watch them pass, eyes wide. They exist to impress, not to nourish. Every dish sent a message. Every ingredient whispered a truth. This is what I can afford. The bread is white. Saffron gave color to the rice. These were not extravagances. They were messages. This court is cultured, refined, beyond the common English roast. Unmistakably, undeniably white. Not the dark loaves of rye or barley. Beside the bread sits a small bowl. Olives, dark and glistening. Imported, treasured. A quiet nod to Eleanor's southern roots. Wine flows, not just from local vineyards, but from beyond. Some sweetened with honey, others warmed with spices. Clove, cinnamon, ginger. Each sip is not just taste. The nobles murmur in clusters, their voices thick with drink, their fingers greasy from duck or dripping pears. It is geography. It is diplomacy. Velvet, deep green. A brooch at her throat, shaped like a lion. Her hands are still. Her eyes are not. Now come the roasts, the centerpiece. Not simple mutton or boiled pork, but peacock, swan, wild boar, dressed in their own feathers after roasting, a spectacle rather than sustenance. Then there are the stews, rich, slow-cooked, layered with flavor. Venison with rosemary. Chicken stewed in almond milk. Eleanor favored the kitchens of the South, lighter sauces, herbs from the garden, citrus when available. Lemon juice added brightness to the meat. She did not shout these things. She served them. As guests eat, or pretend to, minstrels sing softly. The hall is high enough that their notes vanish upward like birds. Children dart between benches, pausing as they're caught by mothers. And Eleanor watches, not from the shadows, from the head of the table. Her gown is rich, yes, but not ostentatious. She is watching who eats what, who speaks to whom, who finishes their cup before others, who avoids the meat, who tries to impress, who does not, because a feast, in her world, is more than food. It is a court, a test, a theater. She has seen many like this, in the palaces of the Capetians in France, in the high towers of England's kings, and on the road as crusaders camped beneath desert stars. The candles drip slowly down their stems. And you understand, the feast was not loud, it was not wild. It was calm, controlled, deliberate, like Eleanor herself. Every dish a gesture, every bite a word. But in her own lands, the feast becomes a kind of language. Without raising her voice, she grants favor. Without lifting a sword, she gathers allegiance. And with each careful course, she reminds her guests that she is not just a hostess. She is a queen, and queens command with more than commands. When the meal ends, there is no formal applause. Just the slow scrape of benches, the murmur of gratitude, the lingering scent of almond, meat, wine, and wax. The servants will clear the remains. The dogs will feast on bones beneath the table. The fire will be banked. And Eleanor will retire, not to sleep, but to plan. Because the real work of a feast happens in the hours afterward. What was agreed between bites? What was suggested over cheese? what was promised between sips of wine, what alliances were formed, not with signatures, but with shared plates. Let yourself sit now, quietly as the hall empties. The tables are long and quiet. In the end, her reigns were turbulent. Her children warred, her husbands betrayed. She was imprisoned, released, respected, remembered. But through it all, she remained a woman of deep perception. She knew that food, when prepared with care, offered with meaning, could shape the fate of nations. Not all power wears armor. Some of it wears aprons. Picture yourself at the close of a long, slow day. Your back aches in familiar places. Your fingers are dusted with earth. The sun has dipped below the edge of the field, and the sky is blue fading into black. In the doorway of a low cottage, light spills, not bright, not sharp, but soft and golden. It is time to eat. Not to feast ... simply to eat. And to rest. The supper hour is not measured by clocks. It is measured by shadows. They stretch longer across the packed dirt outside your door. They bend through the trees and across the path you walked that morning. The work is done for now, though you know it is never truly finished. But in this moment, there is stillness. There is warmth. There is food. A word murmured without urgency. The cottage holds a low hum of sound. A spoon against the rim of a pot. A faint laugh from a child. And the fire, always the fire, still alive in the hearth, its embers glowing like half-buried stars. You gather around the table. If there is a table, it is small, uneven, its wood dark with years. You lean over it, and the steam curls up toward your face, scented with the patient perfume of barley. Leeks, beans, maybe a ribbon of salt pork or bone, simmered just long enough to lend its flavor. If not, you sit where you can. On stools, on the ground, on upturned crates. You sit close, but not for intimacy. For heat, for sharing, for the single lamp that lights the space. It must stay with you through the cold night. The meal is not elaborate. Across from you, an elder eats with smaller bites, her spoon moving with soft rhythm, like a prayer she said 1,000 times. But it is enough. You eat from a wooden bowl, or perhaps a shallow dish carved from horn or clay. You hold it in both hands. It is warm. The stew is thick, not out of richness, but out of necessity. It must satisfy. You chew slowly, not because it is tough, but because your mouth needs time. Your teeth are tired. Your stomach is grateful. It is not unpleasant. Beside you, a child dips crust into broth. She doesn't speak, but watches the bread grow heavy in the bowl, then lifts it carefully to her mouth. Sometimes there is cheese, sharp, hard, a little sour. It is not strong. It is not meant to be. Just safe, slightly sour, enough to clear the mouth between bites. Sometimes eggs, boiled until the yolk runs no more. Sometimes a piece of dried fish, pulled from the rafters, softened by soaking, and laid gently atop the stew to melt into the broth. And sometimes ... just the stew. You do not complain. There is no performance at this table. No plates cleared for show. Food is food, and food is life. The air inside the cottage is thick now, not with smoke, but with closeness. The smells of the day mingle, the sweat from the field, the wool of cloaks, the salt of skin, the cooked pulse of beans and roots and grain. It is real, full, human. Someone passes a cup, rough ceramic, filled with small ale. No one rushes. There is nowhere to be. You have arrived, not at a destination, but at a pause. The fire shifts. A log cracks. Sparks blink and vanish. And still you eat. Each spoonful holds more than food. It holds the field, the harvest, the weather. It holds hands that planted, picked, cleaned, chopped, stirred. It holds time, boiled down to this moment. If anything remains, it will be tomorrow's start. You may not remember this exact meal tomorrow. You may not mark it as special, but you will remember its comfort, its presence, the way it settled into your bones, the way it ended the day. When the bowls are empty, you wipe them with crust. The final piece of bread becomes both sponge and dessert. It softens the edge of the bowl, collects the last of the flavor, and disappears. Nothing is wasted. A finger traces the last streak of broth. A child licks the spoon. The pot, now near empty, is set aside. You lean back. You sigh. It is not exhaustion. It is a kind of quiet fullness, of being reassembled after labor. Voices begin to soften. The small lamp flickers, and the world narrows, not in fear, but in focus. The slow hush of a day closed gently, not with ceremony, but with gratitude. Supper was not a celebration, but it was enough. And in this quiet, simple ending, you feel, perhaps more than ever, that you are home. To the walls of this cottage, to the faces around you, to the glow of the fire, and the taste still lingering in your mouth. A piece of cloth wipes the spoon. A ladle is hung back on its hook. The fire is stirred. The door is checked. A child is cradled, their cheek against your shoulder, breath slowing. You press a kiss into hair that smells of hay and smoke. Outside, the stars have returned. They blink above the trees, indifferent but steady. Inside, the cottage is still. The supper has ended, but it stays with you. Imagine it now, the bowl cradled in your palms, the warmth of stew gone but remembered, your limbs grown heavy with the promise of rest. Sometimes the hearth holds more than food. It is used to boil water for washing cloth, to heat rocks that warm the bed in winter, to melt wax for sealing or tallow for candles, to roast grain before grinding, or to dry herbs before storage. It is a place of constant transformation. The ceiling above is blackened. Smoke seeps through the thatch. A hole, the louver, lets some of it escape, but not all. Your eyes sting slightly. You grow used to blinking. There is ash in everything. It settles on shelves, on your skin, in the air. You wipe it away, only to find it returning. But it is part of life, the price of warmth. In the corners of the hearth, little items gather. A pinch of salt kept dry in a clay dish. These things do not sparkle, but they matter. A small stone warmed for a child's hand. A wooden spoon with a broken handle. Outside, the light changes. Evening drifts slowly in, like a cloak being laid over the fields. The walls flicker with moving shapes, of hands, of tools, of steam rising in ribbons. The hearth now glows brighter. The shadows grow longer. Dinner is a quiet ritual. Floating on top, bits of bean, of grain, of cabbage, perhaps a few slivers of onion. The smell is deep, familiar. You eat with your spoon, carved by hand. The same spoon every day. No second helpings. It is not new. It is what you ate yesterday and the day before. But it comforts. You ladle the stew, thick now, having simmered for hours, into shallow bowls. The broth is cloudy. There are no courses. Only the slow act of eating, of chewing, of holding the bowl close to your chest for warmth. There is a crust of bread, torn, not sliced. There is a sip of ale, warm, slightly sour, made from last week's mash. It is a rhythm, a center, a heart. And there is silence. Not because you are unhappy, but because words are not always needed here. Of steam, of flame, of crackle, of sigh. The hearth speaks its own language, a stir of the ashes. A lid placed carefully on the pot. The tools are wiped, the bench swept. The hearth will sleep now, but never fully. As night settles deeper and the embers turn red and dim, you feed the fire one last time. A log laid gently. Tomorrow, you will light it again. You always do. Because the hearth is more than a tool. It is where time slows, where meals begin, and where, even now, in the flicker of your imagination, ... you can feel the warmth against your skin. Imagine a single flame, small but stubborn ... a flicker of orange cradled in a bed of ash. Around it, a circle of life, hands stirring, feet warming, stories whispered, soup thickening. In the medieval home, the hearth was not just where food was made, it was where time passed. There is a stillness to this moment. The work of the morning is done. The ingredients have been gathered, herbs tied in bunches, roots scrubbed clean, grain measured in the curve of a palm. And now they wait. You wait. Because everything in this place leads back to one thing. The hearth. It sits low, central, close to the earth. Built of stone, or sometimes simply clay packed hard and ringed with bricks. The fire itself is not grand. It is not meant to be seen, only used. It doesn't roar. It murmurs. The air smells of wood smoke, faint and familiar. You know the method well. Dry kindling, the right angle, the patience of blowing air through pursed lips until the first spark flares to life. Sometimes the embers from the night before are enough. Heavy, blackened with age. It is not polished. It is not new, but it is trustworthy. It is shaped by use. The rim is worn smooth where ladles have passed. The base holds a patina of 100 meals. A ladle, a knife, a pair of iron tongs, all simple. They will be crushed between fingers and added to the pot, not to impress, but to nourish. All irreplaceable. The knife must be kept dry. The ladle cleaned with sand and water. The tongs are for coal, not food. You stir them gently. A few flakes rise like fireflies. It clings to your clothes, to your hair. Not unpleasant, just present. Constant thread through the tapestry of every day. Smoky bread with a soft inside. There are no matches, no gas, no knobs to turn. To build a fire, you kneel. You do not measure in spoons. You test a bit of grain between your teeth. It is a dialogue between food and fire, between you and time. You measure in memory. True ovens, domed, clay, heat-holding, are communal. Once or twice a week, you bake. Once lit, the fire must be tended. Always. One mends a torn tunic, the thread thick and uneven. Another peels root vegetables with slow care. Someone turns a spit, not meat, unless it is a feast day, the slow breath of people resting, the scrape of spoon on pot. But perhaps apples or chestnuts, or a small fish caught from the stream. Your thumb fits into a shallow groove where it has always rested. The spoon does not clink. It glides. Letting it die means more than losing warmth. It means time lost, meals delayed, cold rooms and long hours. So it stays alive, low and steady, smoldering beneath the ash, waiting for breath. Above it, hanging from a beam, or swung across a metal arm, is the pot. It is iron. This pot does not know recipes. It knows rhythm. It holds porridge in the morning, soup in the afternoon, leftovers at night. It is never truly empty. You stir it with a long spoon. The handle is wood, carved from ash or beech. Other tools hang nearby, not many. On a hook in the rafters, strings of dried herbs dangle. They turn slowly in the rising heat. Sage, thyme, fennel, mint. Some herbs are for flavor, some for health. A bit of marjoram for digestion. A clove of garlic to warm the blood. A handful of dill to soothe a cough. The fire is not only for cooking, it is for baking too. Though in most peasant homes, the hearth is not an oven. But if you must cook something small, you shape it into ash cakes, dough flattened and buried directly in the warm coals, then brushed clean, revealing a crisp, You know how to feel for readiness. There is no timer, no beeping. You tap the loaf, listen for hollowness. You lift the lid and judge the smell. Around the hearth, the family gathers, not in celebration, but by necessity. This is the warmest place, the only source of light at dusk, the only defense against winter. The children sit near the edge, their backs to the wall. The elders sit on low stools, closer. There is little talking, but there is presence. The crackle of fire. Time moves differently here. There is no hurry. The meal will be ready when it is ready. In the corner of the croft, a cabbage grows. It is not the tidy, tight ball of a market cabbage, but loose-leaved and tall. Its scent is strong, bitter, even, but it will soften in a stew. Alongside it, leeks stretch upward. Their white stalks are cool to the touch. Turnips wait below the soil, swollen and purple-veined, half-hidden. You dig with a small spade. The soil is heavy from last night's rain. It clings to your knees. You lift the vegetables one by one, brushing the dirt off with thick fingers. Each root is a small success. Behind the house, you've kept a row of beans, growing up poles, tangled in vines. Their pods are long and green. Some you will eat fresh. Some you will dry and save for winter when the fields give nothing. There is no waste, no abundance. Each sprout is watched. Each bulb is valued. You think in weeks, in seasons, never in convenience. As autumn deepens, you gather apples from the edge of the wood, but baked in the coals with a bit of honey, or what is left of it, they are soft, sweet, fragrant. They are small, tart, pocked with blemishes. You dry some slices on racks near the hearth. You string others into garlands, hung to keep them from mice. Preservation is its own form of cooking. You pickle onions in brine. You salt strips of meat when there is any. You stew fruit into thick pastes and press them into jars made from home. The winter months are long, and the pantry, a small shelf, a cool hole in the ground, a hanging bag above the rafters, must hold enough to carry you through. The seasons are not just time, they are diet. Spring is green and thin. Summer is richer, but full of work. The fire still smolders. The pot is ready. Autumn is a brief indulgence, perhaps after drying or boiling or fermenting, but it will feed you. Winter is survival. You do not choose your meals. The earth does. By midday, your basket is full. Your back aches in the honest way. The sun rides higher now, warming the narrow footpaths, casting soft shadows beneath the trees. You walk home slowly, each step guided by habit, by memory. What you carry is not just food. It is story, effort, and time. You return to the cottage. What you gathered will become a meal, or part of one. Perhaps not today, and tomorrow ... you will do it again. Because the rhythm of gathering never truly ends. It shifts. It follows the moon, the frost, the seed. And you, bound by hunger, by care, by ancient knowledge, follow it too. The ingredients for a medieval meal did not come from a shop. They came from the earth, and not easily. To eat was to sow, to wait, to bend, to gather. It was to be in rhythm with the land, and to know what it could give you, and what it could take away. After the fire has warmed your hands, after the morning meal has given you its small comfort, a spade, a woven basket, your own fingers, calloused and remembering. The day turns outward, into the fields, into the woods, into the low, slow labor of gathering what will become tomorrow's meal. There is no grocery list in your pocket, no jars on a shelf waiting to be opened. It is survival. Only the tools of your life, a sickle. The land, to you, is not scenery. It is not untouched. It has been walked, worked, folded by feet, scarred by blades, shaped by centuries of planting and harvesting and planting again. There are fields you share with others, and a small strip of land behind your cottage, known as a croft, where you might grow onions, cabbages, leeks, and a few healing herbs. There is no lawn, no fence, just the soft, uneven spread of the soil, dappled in dew, stitched with weeds. Others from neighbors, from monks, from old women who knew the secret names of weeds. You wear cloth around your hands. Or perhaps your skin is too familiar with pain to mind anymore. There is chickweed, soft and edible. Plantain, good for both wounds and stews. Sorrel, with its lemony tongue that lifts the blandness of barley. In spring, its white flowers open like tiny stars. You crush a leaf between your fingers. It leaves a scent that will follow you home. A thrush sings from a nearby tree. You carry a basket that creaks softly with every step. Let us begin here. Let us kneel down beside you. Not in punnets, but scattered like tiny gifts. Blackberries cling to thorny vines, staining your fingers. Elderberries droop in dusky clusters. You eat one, tart. You work the open fields, shared among villagers, divided by custom, plowed in long strips. In early spring, you watch the oxen drag the plow, heavy, wheezing creatures whose breath smoked in the cold air. Behind them, the blade tore into soil, cutting furrows that would drink the rain, bed another, and save the rest. Your hands grasp the stalks in bundles, slicing low with a sickle. It crackles with movement, the hiss of wheat and wind, the flick of sparrows stealing seed, the rustle of mice in the undergrowth. You work slowly, always slowly, because if you rush, you bleed. You look across the field, rows and rows still left. But you do not complain, because every stalk cut means food. Every grain threshed means bread. The morning is still young. The sun is gentle, casting long shadows from the cottage eaves. Today, you will gather what you can, because food in this world is never certain. It is always enough. For now, you begin with the easiest gifts, those that ask for nothing but awareness. There is no machinery, no automation, only your rhythm. Step, reach, scatter, step again. You pick with care, never taking too much from one place. There is a quiet code to foraging, ancient, unspoken. It protects the land so it may feed you again. Wild herbs grow at the edges of paths, under trees, between fence posts. Some you learned from your mother. Your fingers brush through the greenery. You bend, slowly, tall, shivering in the wind like an ocean of straw. The morning damp soaks into your hem. From the hedgerow, you find nettles. They sting, they always sting, but boiled, they soften into something earthy and rich. Further down the track, you find wild garlic. Its smell is sharp, unmistakable. Sometimes there are mushrooms, though these you must know well. Some are death, others delight. It is a line you tread with reverence. And in summer, the woods offer berries, not in piles. If the season is kind, and not every season is, the fields will give you grain. Barley, oats, rye, and, for the rare few, wheat. You do not plant the grain on your own land. You remember the smell of turned earth, damp, alive. You sowed the seed with a swinging arm, reaching into a sack tied at your waist, scattering the kernels in arcs that caught the light. Now, months later, you are here to harvest. The stalks are golden. The sun is hot on your neck. Sweat beads beneath your collar. You stack the grain in sheaves, tied tight, leaned upright to dry. A field is never silent. Sometimes you pause to breathe. You wipe your brow with a sleeve. You drink water from a leather flask. The morning work begins with the animals. You push open the door. The air outside bites at your cheeks, but it wakes you. It carries the scent of dew-soaked grass, manure, frost, depending on the season. If you have chickens, You check for eggs. If you have a cow, and only the better off peasants do, she will need milking. The sound of milk hitting the pail is almost musical. A soft splash, rhythmic and alive. It's warm in your hands, slightly sweet in the air. If you have a pig, it must be fed. And if the weather is clear, and the sun begins to rise, a golden mist curls through the hedgerows. The village begins to stir. A woman with a shawl over her hair carries a bucket from the well. 2 boys herd geese along the road. An old man hunches beside a wheelbarrow, grunting softly. No one shouts. No one rushes. Morning is slow. There is no bakery yet, not in the early Middle Ages. A cloth. You hang the cooking pot on a hook above the coals, adjust the kettle, check the flue. You grind salt with a stone. You sift what little flour remains. The bread is flattened, tough, but filling. The grind is never fine. It contains bits of husk, of stone, even of grit. But it will rise. And when it does, it smells like comfort. You bake at home, or with neighbors, or at the communal oven in the village, paying the man who oversees it. You take your grain to the mill, where the miller will grind it for a fee, usually a portion of the flour itself. Your neighbors are also awake. Back in the house, the pot is stirred again. The fire is kept going, always. Letting it die means hours to bring it back. You tidy the cottage, not out of pride, but order. A broom. It is a ritual, a rhythm, a comfort that anchors you in place. The morning passes into mid-morning. There is no breakfast hour. There is only before work. And then, work. Children are given a crust to hold in their hands. It keeps them still, full of warmth, full of wood smoke, full of slow nourishment. And we follow the people into the fields to gather what they must cook tomorrow. Babies are nursed or fed thin mash. And you think about the day ahead, the fields, the tasks, the walk to the Lord's land, the planting, the repairs, the endless cycle. But for a brief time, you sit. You let the fire warm your fingers. You listen to the wind against the cottage wall. You close your eyes and breathe. And you remember, as your ancestors did, and their ancestors before them, that food is not just fuel. The morning in a peasant's cottage was not hurried. It was purposeful. And above all, it was quiet. And so, as the sun rises slowly over the thatched roofs, and the first calls of labor echo across the fields, we leave this small, smoky room behind. Imagine yourself waking before the sun ... not to an alarm, but to the slow shift of warmth from beneath the thatched roof. The soft crackle of embers beneath ash ... the faint breath of someone nearby, still wrapped in dreams. The morning in a medieval peasant's cottage did not begin with haste. It began with necessity. The black sky would still be soft with stars, and the world outside the cottage door, damp, earthy, and waiting, held no urgency, but only a steady, silent promise. The day would come and work would follow. There were no clocks on the walls, no scheduled alarms. The mattress is stuffed with rushes or straw, and sometimes with feathers if you are lucky. The scent is familiar, a little musty, a little clean, like dry hay after a long summer. Above you, the beams of the roof hold tight bundles of herbs hung to dry, sage, thyme, a few sprigs of yarrow, gathered the season before. The air in the cottage is thick with the smell of hearth smoke, not acrid or choking, but lingering, woven into the walls, the thatch, your clothes. It clings to the skin, like an old friend. The older ones, half buried beneath wool blankets, still breathe in rhythm. You hear it, a slow, even breath. There is peace in that sound, peace before the work. The hearth is not decorative, it is central. It is the heart of the house. If you are even luckier, a slice of salt pork left from winter, but usually ... it is pottage. She tends it like a sacred task, because without it, there is no breakfast. Without it, there is only hunger. It was made from rye or barley, or a mix of whatever grains the miller gave back, rarely wheat. Wheat is for those who can pay for whiteness. Someone stirs the ashes. A carrot. A pinch of herbs, a sliver of onion, cooked long, stirred often, reheated day after day, changed with each addition. You hear the scraping of iron against stone, the clink of a pot shifted gently, and then you sit up. The air is cold. Outside, a bird begins to chirp, the first of the day. You wipe your mouth with the back of your hand. You drink. The floor is packed earth, swept each morning with a broom of tied twigs. If it is winter, rushes cover it, fresh ones laid over old, sometimes mixed with dried lavender or sweet flag to cover smells. It softens each step. It is a blackbird, most likely. The sound is rounded, like a question. The children do not wake yet. The baby stirs against a makeshift cradle, little more than a padded basket tucked into the warmest corner. Breakfast will not be sweet. There is no jam, no honey, unless it was traded. But there will be bread, or something close to bread. Yesterday's loaf is hard now, tough on the outside, still heavy on the inside. The bread is sliced with a small, dull knife. There is a pot on the fire now. Inside, grain, a handful of dried beans, maybe a cud of root. If you are lucky, you have leeks. Pottage, a word you will hear again and again, is not a dish, but an idea. It is the sum of whatever you have. Barley boiled until it thickens. You eat slowly, not out of reverence, but preservation. The food must last. The stomach must be satisfied, if not full. There are no chairs in the house. You sit on low stools or on the ground. Hello, and welcome ... to another slow and sleepy journey through time. This is Echo, and tonight we invite you to drift gently into the world of medieval food and cooking. A world not of feasts and fanfare, but of barley and broth ... of quiet hands stirring porridge ... of bread rising in shared ovens ... and a single clay pot beginning to bubble gently over embers that never truly died out. Of hunger, patience, and deeply human rhythms. You're just here to eat. Like them. Slowly, simply, quietly. Imagine the quiet hush of a pre-dawn village. A fire barely stirring, the smell of damp wood smoke curling in the cold air. You're not here to hunt dragons or storm castles. And the strength of your back. But back then, back in the winding centuries of the Middle Ages, eating was not so simple. In the modern world, food is something we can summon with a touch. A refrigerator hums in the dark. A kettle boils with a button. It was slow, seasonal ... sometimes sacred, and sometimes desperate. It was a daily labor. But with something as simple and as eternal as a meal, an art, a memory passed down in wooden spoons and woven baskets, the rules of fasting that governed diets, and the luxury of flavor that crossed continents on the backs of camels and ships, and a reflection of everything else, the land, the weather, the church, the lord of the manor, and status in another. And yet, how the shadow of hunger and the equalizing force of plague sometimes collapsed those distinctions altogether. Tonight, we are not racing through timelines. We are lingering, savoring. We are letting the rhythm of their lives lull us. And we begin, not with a battlefield, nor a coronation. Throughout this episode, we will gently wander through 4 distinct paths of thought, each one a lantern-lighted corridor into the medieval kitchen, pantry, and table. First, we'll settle into the rhythms of everyday eating. A morning in a peasant's cottage, a slow gathering of wild herbs and roots, a hearth as the center of warmth and life, and a humble supper shared by candlelight. Then we'll drift into stories, lives and moments shaped by food, of salt and scarcity, of fingers stained with berry juice and eyes squinting over smoke. It's a story of your ancestors, of all our ancestors, who did what they could to fill their stomachs, one slow stew at a time. You'll meet a queen whose feasts were weapons of politics, monks whose quiet meals echoed their devotion, and a people brought to their knees by famine, when bread disappeared and bark became sustenance. Next, we'll dig deeper into the mystery beneath the meals. The bones archaeologists found in village pits, the spices scribbled into ancient recipe books. And finally, we'll witness contrast. A single loaf of bread might mean fullness in one house. We'll explore how the rich and the poor cooked differently, ate differently. But before we begin, take a breath. Feel your body settle. You are safe and warm, and far from the cold hearths of the past. Let the slow rhythm of history soothe you. Let the soft crackle of imagined firewood quiet your thoughts. And let your mind wander as we begin our slow, candlelit descent into the kitchens of the Middle Ages. This is not a story of glory. It's a story of grinding grain. Let's begin with the most ordinary magic of all, the smell of breakfast in a medieval peasant's home.